I guess it would be more correct to say Wilhelm Reich. The Reichian school has an interesting slant on Freudianism and on psychology. They focus on the body and the biotics, and they talk about armoring. Of course, we already talked about the skyscrapers and this whole armoring way that things are made, and even the sports and the sort of the different exercise, machines and programs. There's a lot of this concept, even in car design, and all across the world. There's a lot of armoring motifs going on. Even the whole bodybuilding cult. I mean, there's so many versions of this. But on a psychological level, Reich was the first one to say the body matters. His critiques of Freud, you see, was that the patient just lies down on a couch, and it's in a sort of a darkened environment almost, and that the whole focus was on the mental, meaning the brain and the communication, the words, and the body was inert. Wilhelm Reich came along. He was a contemporary of Freud, and he said, look, the body here is very static, but the body is an extension of a man's psychology. And I'm a huge fan of Wilhelm Reich, and partly it's because of this, that he started to incorporate the body physical in the act of psychological healing, because the body's tensions, I mean, this is obvious to anyone who's done massage or polarity therapy. There's a whole culture of this now, but people often forget who the progenitors of this were. So Wilhelm Reich was the one who started to look into the way a person's body is, you see, is an extension of their thinking. It's tremendously important. And coming out of that Reichian idea is also that the body is where technology begins. Because just as the mind controls the body functions, both consciously and unconsciously, I mean, when you go to sleep, your heart doesn't stop, does it? And the eyes still blink, and the lungs still work, you see? So there's a control, the autonomic control is very much the basis and beginning of man's interest in technology. Let's go back to Sigmund Freud. Freud discovered that he not only had 3 divisions of consciousness, he had 3 stages of human development, right? The famous oral, anal, and the genital stages, right? And at one of these stages, the human child starts to have control over its own sphincters, right? It must control its own bodily movements, going to the toilet, eyes watering, mouth dribbling as children do, right? So necessary control over the biology, over the autonomic functions, kicks in. This is very, very necessary as we grow. First we don't have it, then we learn it. This particular biological capacity to control sphincters is very prominent in the male child. And this is what Freud always saw as the male child becoming very interested in gadgets, because it becomes an extension. You see, knobs, levers, switches, and all the rest of it, putting together engines, like the Meccano sets and Lego and all of this stuff. Why are human children interested in this? People don't ever think about this, but psychologists have, and they know that this fascinating interest with puzzles, even with playing things like chess. That's why you have chess prodigies, people who excel in science, the sort of Stephen Hawking type. And of course he would be a perfect example, because what happened to him, he was a quadriplegic. So there's a perfect example there of a man who lost all his bodily control and therefore sublimated it into mental control, mental brilliance with mathematics and with computation and all of these kinds of things. So the very scientific urges, especially technically, arises out of, again, a psychological dynamic in which the human being necessarily controls their walking, their muscle control, their sphincter control, right? Okay, we've talked about normal development. What do you think kind of technology a male or a female child will be interested in if their thinking is warped for one reason or another, or their parents were warped, or something went off, or like I said, they're disconnected from their unconscious? Then you're going to have all the gadget fixation, and you're going to have all the interest in technology, but it's going to be in a pathological way. And that is exactly what we find in those people who excel at creating bombs and guns and all the weapons of war, and knives and swords, and who have this fascination, you see, with death and all the rest of it. This is the psychologist who really looked at this was a man called Erich Fromm. He was a sociologist, contemporary of Freud again. Tremendous man, tremendous thinker, who went into this whole thing about the anatomy of human destructiveness and connecting it to these necrotic elements of the human psyche. I dealt with that in other work. And so this is, again, what we find in the world today. So Wilhelm Reich is a tremendously important, a scholar who helps us to understand that technology in the body is connected, that the heart moving, the legs walking, all of the different aspects of our human body is really a form of technology in its purest sense. And therefore man, having control over his body, then wants control over his environment. And as I said about the martial artist, you can have two kinds of person. You're going to have a person who just simply wants control over their environment for good reasons. Not because they're particularly acquisitive or dominant or aggressive. But then you're going to have the other kind of person who wants control over his environment because he has no control within. He's incredibly fragile, actually, psychically and spiritually and emotionally and morally. So this becomes your typical tyrannical little bully boy, repulsive, psychopathic creature who goes around, to control everyone, to control the kids, his friends that he grows up with, to control his siblings, to control his parents, driving them absolutely mad, going around beating other people up, you see. He grows into the teenager that becomes the sort of, the gang leader or some sort of other maniac. And then he grows up into the husband who, beats his wife around and causes all sorts of havoc to everybody, who goes thumping and punching and fighting and all sorts of things, who may even go into becoming, wanting to go to the, join the military or join the police force so he can push, people around and all of these kinds of things. So these people are loose in our society. They're absolutely loose in our society. And again, it's rooted in their connections with their own body. There's a huge element there in their connection with their love-hate relationship with themselves.
So it's
a whole piece that we've explored about man's self-hate and his own self-sadism. An incredible question there about the dichotomy between self-love and self-hate, and narcissism versus egoism, and all of these incredible